Hello and welcome to the first talk in the new Curious season called Pop. If there was ever any doubt that the internet is real life, the events of the past year dispelled it forever. Not just the fact that we had to spend so much time online, but because of what happened in early January this year, when internet culture was heavily involved in the plot to overthrow the United States government. What was noticeable about the insurrection was how many internet memes were on display, from Pepe the Frog to Kekistan. All of this came from internet culture. And it's probably flown under the radar for a lot of people, but it's been there for a very long time. I highly recommend you check out a film on BBC iPlayer called Feels Good Man, which explains the history of Pepe the Frog and how it became involved in kind of right-wing movements in this way. Elon Musk says, who controls the memes controls the universe. And I guess what this is, it's about the power of ideas. If we accept the formula that culture is just some ideas being greater than other ideas, then you can say that who controls the ideas controls the culture. We talk a lot about populating culture, but to populate culture you have to really understand culture. I'm going to focus very much on pop culture during this talk, by which I mean things like entertainment, that's film, music, television, video games, but also sports, fashion and technology, and about how in 2020 the COVID-19 lockdowns kind of smashed all of these things together. Now, to be clear, they were coming together anyway. They were starting to converge for the past few years. We've just really rapidly seen that accelerate. That's partly because, as I mentioned, in the last year, UK adults aged 18 to 54 spent almost 5 hours a day online in 2020. That's up around 45 minutes from January of the same year. And if you want to know how much that is, it's around a third to a quarter of your waking life being spent online. I've said 18 to 54 here, not because I've got anything against people aged 55 plus, but just because from that year upwards, the generations tend to spend less time online. So I want to focus on the very, very online aspect. And it's also interesting to see how generations diverge in how they spend time with media, commercial media. If you look at the UK average of all adults, pre-lockdown, they spent slightly over half of their time engaging with digital media, and come the lockdown, that shifted the other way, and actually people spent a little bit more time on average with traditional media or non-digital media. But if you go down and look at the 16 to 34-year-olds, it's completely the opposite story. Not only were they already spending a lot more time engaging with digital media than traditional media, but that number went up. So you see the divergence in the age groups and between how they spent more of their time during lockdowns. What's even more interesting than that is the change in how people spend time online. There's this growing thing called social plus. Now, I don't blame you if you don't want to hear another buzzword, but social plus is something that's becoming more and more interesting. To define it slightly, it's social plus, you would say, is a platform with a social graph where the graph itself isn't the main feature. So you don't go there because your friends go there, you go there and your friends are there. There's always a reason for something to be there, whether it's shopping, entertainment or something. That's the reason you go to these things, and then there's a social graph built up around that. Facebook and Twitter are social. The power of the social graph is the whole reason that those things are useful. Whereas Fortnite and TikTok are social plus. The people go there for other reasons, and then they hang out with their friends while they're there. We've noticed that this kind of idea of open social, if you will, things like Facebook and Twitter, while the platforms continue to grow, the open social side of it is in decline. This idea that you can just mash together generations and different interest groups and work colleagues and old school friends, all of these things into one big news feed, is having negative effects. And so what we're starting to see from all social apps is a move away from this and into more interest based groups. This is Twitter Communities, which was just announced this week. You've also got Twitter Topics, Instagram Guides, Facebook Groups, Facebook Campus, which is just for students. You've got much more focuses on messaging, group messaging as well. And also a bigger focus on creators. Instagram say our focus has always been on creators. I'm not sure that's true, but it's certainly true of the last few years. And same with YouTube, they want to provide tools for creators and support them. And that's about kind of also commercializing that relationship, because creators make fandoms, and fandoms make culture, and culture makes money. To give you an example of the power of fandom, this is Jimmy Donaldson. He's 22 years old. He goes by the name of Mr. Beast online. He's got a huge YouTube following, 54 million people following him on YouTube. Every video he releases has a minimum of 10 million views. And his thing is big stunts. So he'll use the power of his network to raise money or to go out and get donations from businesses, and then he'll do a big stunt. Like one time he bought the entire contents of a shop and filmed it and posted it. At the end of last year, he's very smartly leveraged another user behavior, which is the fact that we're all spending more time indoors and getting more food delivered. Has caused the rise of what are called dark kitchens, which is just kitchens that are set up with no restaurant but only to fulfill delivery. And there's loads of these. So he used this and his fandom to almost overnight launch a 300 unit burger chain, Mr. Beast Burgers. So one day there was no Mr. Beast Burgers. The next day there was a chain as big as some of the bigger Five Guys or even bigger chains like that in the US, Shake Shack. And he sold, according to his figures, over 1 million burgers in 2 months. That's the power of fandom. And one more example, we talk. You've probably seen this. This is Nathan Apodaca. He became famous last year for his TikTok where he was drinking Ocean Breeze cranberry juice and skateboarding down the road while Fleetwood Mac was playing. People loved it. Very popular. Brands especially loved it because it was prominently featured. But it wasn't TikTok's biggest video of the year, not by a long chalk. The biggest video of the year was by Bella Porch. Bella Porch is 24 years old. She's Filipina. She has 58 million followers on the platform. And the biggest video on TikTok of the year was her simply lip syncing to a song by a 15-year-old grime artist from Blackpool called Millie B. Millie B didn't have a contract at the time. It was like a mixtape kind of effort. She's since recorded an official video which features people on TikTok singing along to her song. She's put that on YouTube. That, in the space of about 4 months, has had almost 9 million views on YouTube. And if we compare that, and I'm not picking on the guy, if we compare that to someone big and established and famous like Gary Barlow, he put up a song more or less the same time from his new album featuring Michael Bublé, another popular singer, and that reached about 1/4 of the views in roughly the same time. That's just the power of fandoms. People talk about TikTok being the new Vine or TikTok being the new YouTube, but really it's also that and the new Spotify and the new MTV. It's a place where people go to watch videos, discover new music, learn about what's happening in culture. And there's maybe a notion amongst some people that TikTok is a bit of a flash in the pan. It's not really, worth investing your time in. It was here today, gone tomorrow. Last year it had 850 million downloads globally. That's by far the most downloaded app. It's not even close for the second most downloaded app of last year. And from nothing in the UK, virtually nothing, not registered in 2019, 3.5% of all video viewing time in the UK last year was on TikTok. And its influence is enormous. So in the US, the Billboard Hot 100 of the week of 13th of April, every single track in the top 10 had found a foothold on TikTok, whether that was from simply the music being played in videos or people doing dance challenges or people adding their own versions to it. But it was the first kind of TikTok top 10 that the US had ever seen. And TikTok has revolutionized the way music is recorded and the way music is discovered, because it's really simplified it down into a 15-second sound. It's got to be something hooky. It's got to be something that people get and like and want to copy. It's bite-sized, it's transformable, and it's viral. Perfect exemplar of this is this guy. He's 17 years old, from New Zealand. His producer name is George685. He created a beat based on the type of music that he said he likes to hear coming from Jeep sound systems in his native New Zealand. So he created this beat, put it on TikTok, on YouTube. It got picked up by some TikTok users and they started using it in their videos. It then got heard by someone who's extremely adept at using TikTok. That's the singer Jason Derulo. So Jason Derulo took his beat, obviously compensated him for it, turned it into a song called Savage Love, took that back to TikTok, did dance duets with some of the most popular TikTok creators, and eventually a remix from BTS, like probably the biggest boy band in the world at the moment, and we'll come to it a little bit later, and it just absolutely blew up. One of the songs of the year, and it's all based on this idea of iterating on things that people have made. And fans, who are kind of crucial to the success of cultural phenomena, expect to participate in the culture they valorize as well as its audience. They're not just consumers, they're active as well. In other words, TikTok is an emulative medium. People see, people repeat, people change, people remix, and you get to see, really, that's a real measure of popularity. If someone's just, viewed the video a couple of times or hit a like button a couple of times, that's nowhere near as powerful as what TikTok gives you, which is people have actually taken time out of their day to make a version or make a reaction or share that song with other people. It's really, really powerful. And talking of TikTok still, and remix culture in particular, I'm not going to go into too much detail about cultures on TikTok because we've got Rob Estretino is going to do a talk about that very soon, which is going to cover a lot of this. But there's a couple of things I think that are really worth paying attention to, and that is the fact that, as I mentioned, these things are iterative and emulative and remixed. So last year there was a brief moment when sea shanties became popular because one person on TikTok was singing them. It was picked up by other people who started to add their own harmonies using the duet feature. And then that was picked up by people adding instrumentation, and it grew and it grew and it grew. And then you saw people like Gary Barlow. And again, it seems like I'm picking on Gary Barlow. I'm not picking on Gary Barlow. He's just in this example. Gary Barlow and Ronan Keating of Boyzone doing a duet, their version of it. It's like the old culture reacting to the new culture. And you had famously the Ratatouille musical, which began life as not exactly a joke, but someone on TikTok wrote a song for an imaginary Ratatouille musical. Other people loved the idea, started writing their own songs for it, started designing costumes, scenery. That became such a movement in itself that it eventually became a 2-night Broadway show for charity, featuring Broadway stars and performers and professional arrangements. And I think this is sort of what we see in augmented reality as well. In augmented reality, if you build a branded lens or effect and you give that to people and they choose to use it, that's great for you because they're actively choosing to spend time with your brand. But it does also mean that you're losing some control over what they do with that. If people are using your branded effect, you don't know what else is going on in that video. I think it's great and slightly scary. Evan Spiegel of Snapchat says, when you're doing something with AR, you're giving about 80% of the pixels to the audience and letting them reshape the narrative. TikTok was massive in India, and it was recently banned there because of the India's border dispute with China. So a vacuum was created that was very quickly filled, and it's notable especially to see YouTube and Instagram release their own clones, copycats, responses, whatever you want to call them. YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels both launched in India first. India is Facebook's biggest market. India is YouTube's biggest market. So this sort of really makes sense. But what it's also indicative of is how much a lot of this culture is being driven from outside the US and the West now. Bloomberg's monthly pop star power list in January 2021, half of the people on that list come from places that speak a language where English is not the first choice. People from Puerto Rico, from Colombia, from India, from South Korea. These are the kind of the new capitals of pop music. The bands that are big now internationally are not always the Western acts, although they're still popular. But you have BTS, which from South Korea, no doubt the biggest boy band in the world at the moment. Blackpink, also from South Korea, no doubt the biggest girl band in the world at the moment. Bad Bunny from Puerto Rico. Anitta from Brazil, the Brazilian Beyonce, some people call her. She's had 2 Netflix specials about her already, and is absolutely massive, but probably not known so much by the old culture. And this goes into what we watch as well. Netflix especially has had massive success with foreign or non-English language shows. Sweet Home is a Korean horror series based on a comic. The Girl on the Train there's already been a version of this, an American version of this, but there's now a new version based in London, but all in a mixture of Hindi and English, and it's kind of focusing on the Indian immigrant experience, retelling of that story. Money Heist is Netflix's biggest show, La Casa de Papel, that's all in Spanish. And this year, one of their top 3 releases was a show called Lupin, which is French and entirely, all of the dialogue is in French. Yes, you can choose to dub it, or you can have subtitles on it, but it's this new internationalization of the media that we consume that's really interesting. Meanwhile, poor old cinemas, no signs of reopening yet, and will probably be amongst the last to reopen. What that means is big entertainment franchises like the Marvel Cinematic Universe have nowhere to go. So when Marvel announced their plans for the next wave of films 18 or so months ago, by this point we should have had 3 new Marvel films already. Obviously that hasn't happened, they've all been pushed back. But does that mean that Marvel has dropped out of the cultural conversation? Of course not. They have Disney Plus, which is released, but also the Avengers characters spent a lot of last year in Fortnite, appearing in Fortnite in a big crossover event where players could unlock the skins and dress as the characters, and took storylines that kind of crossed the 2 universes. It was interesting as well that these characters that you see here that were in Fortnite weren't scheduled to be in the Marvel films of this round. So it's kind of giving them some use in their downtime as well. But it's not just Marvel that benefit from this. Disney's The Mandalorian is heavily featured in the latest season of Fortnite content. They've just released Ripley and the Alien from the Alien movies. We've had G.I. Joe, Predator, Street Fighter, Gangnam Style. All of these things are appearing in Fortnite, and the latest news just from this week is that DC Comics are writing a 6-issue limited Fortnite series, crossing over the characters in the comics, and each comic will come with a digital code that unlocks the characters in the game as well. It's really smashing culture together, and it's doing it in such an interesting way, and it's kind of designed from the bottom up to be able to do this. Now I know you've seen a slide about Travis Scott in Fortnite in many decks already, but what's really interesting is not the fact that this thing happened, but of how it happened and what it means. It was, for a start, promoted heavily across TikTok, because that's the same type of audience that's crossing into Fortnite. He knows where the people are, and he's inviting them to come to this thing in the right way. Also, there was lots of in-game unlockables, there was out-of-game merch, there was Apple Music and Spotify playlists. All of these things together promoted a complete package around this event that took place in Fortnite, which made him an estimated $20 million from that one, well, it was repeated 4 times, but from that one performance alone, which is way bigger than he would ever get from touring. And if you compare that to the biggest physical tour that's ever taken place, which was Ed Sheeran's Divide, 47 million people participated in the 4 Travis Scott shows. 9 million people bought a ticket to see Ed Sheeran on the tour. That's over 255 dates. That is not a reflection on popularity in any way. Ed Sheeran made tons of money from that, super successful. It's just reflective of the fact that touring is not a viable option for many people in the audience. They simply can't see them, and artists have to tour a lot to reach a really big audience. And it's instructive that people in the music industry and the gaming industry are saying, even when physical touring is a thing again, we think this is just going to carry on happening, because it allows us to reach that other audience, and it works well. Music is super important to video games. The FIFA football series has always included music. on the menu screens between the games. And it's been a big launching point for artists to get new songs to the public in the past, so much so that the game now has 2 modes, each with its own separate playlist. And this year, Dua Lipa, who launched her new album in the first lockdown, she not only got a track onto the soundtrack of FIFA, but actually became an unlockable playable character in the game. That's knowing your audience. And we're kind of reaching the point where it just seems silly. We ask people, we don't ask people, do you watch movies or do you listen to music? Of course they do. And we're reaching the point now where we'll kind of won't be asking that question of games anymore. We won't be asking, do you play games? We'll be asking, what games do you play? Because they're so pervasive. Recent GWI survey, 87% of its respondents aged 16 to 64 said they play video games. And really the only thing that changes is the type of games you play. Things like MOBA games, multiplayer online battle arena like Fortnite, very popular with younger audiences, tend to drop off by like early middle age, whereas sports games sort of not so popular with a younger audience and then pick up through the early middle age and then drop off again as you get older. And puzzle and platform games get way popular the older you get. So it's knowing this audience is absolutely critical. That's why when the US politician Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wanted to reach young people to get them out to vote, she went to Twitch. In the past, she probably would have gone to MTV or Rock the Vote or one of these kind of cool youth movements. But today she went to Twitch, partly because nobody's allowed to leave the house, but also partly because that's where young people spend their time. So she spent a 4-hour session playing the game Among Us and encouraging people to get out and vote. Video games are also, they're designed as social experiences increasingly. In the past, you would buy your new game disc and then you would sit down and play it for 8 to 12 hours by yourself, and then that was it was over. But increasingly nowadays, as we're more connected and more online, they're social experiences. Actually, I read a sort of a moral panic article in a newspaper recently from a parent saying, oh, my son just spends all his time on PlayStation. I know he can't go out, but I wish he was on the phone talking to his friends more. And I thought, madam, he probably is, because a PlayStation is a kind of phone too. For all you know, he may well be there talking to his friends by text messaging or through video messaging and voice calling in the game itself. Online social gaming has extended the lifespan of games as well. If we look at an exemplar of GTA series, the Grand Theft Auto series, in the past it would have 2 or 3 iterations per console generation. But when GTA 5 came out 8 years ago now, it had an online mode, and that online mode is kept constantly up to date with frequent content drops, with new seasons of content, and that's extended its lifespan to the point where that game is now on its 3rd console generation. There was no original GTA game for the PlayStation 4. There may well not be a new one for the PlayStation 5 for all we know. And this longevity of social plus gaming is very good for brands because it means they don't have to get onto that launch window PR anymore. Big game releases in the past, if you weren't in the conversation around it in the first week or so, then you missed out entirely, unless you had something within the game, but then you had to commit to having that thing in the game basically forever. With online social gaming, frequent updates and content drops and seasonal content, that's a great opportunity now for brands to get involved in that. It's also good for players because they can maintain a persistent identity in these games that grows over years, instead of creating a new one for each new version of a game. That's why you see things like Animal Crossing having so much connection with people's identity. You could express your political identity, although Nintendo, to be fair, were not very happy about that and deliberately prohibited it afterwards. You could express your gender or sexual identity through things like Global Pride, but you could also just show off your visual identity and your brand identity by creating and using and wearing official fashion from brands like Marc Jacobs and Valentino in the game. And while big brands very quickly got involved in that, it has to be said that these started as consumer-made, as creator-made objects. They created that desire path and they were the ones that kind of moved towards it. In some games, fashion is super important already. The NBA series, which is like, I guess, FIFA's huge in Europe and NBA in the US, there is a street mode in that where you can dress your character up using real streetwear brands. So that's a really important. Loads of brands want to be in on that with every new release that comes out. And you have brands like Levi starting to move into Bitmoji. Bitmoji doing many, many more brand partnerships now. And the North Face and Gucci collab became available in Pokemon Go. But it's also, a lot of it so far has been about fashion, but it doesn't have to be. It's anything that people feel and identify with could be part of their identity in the virtual worlds as well. Ford recently teamed up with a game called Rocket League, which is the most watched sport game on Twitch. And they released a model of their Ford F-150 car, which is the most popular vehicle in the world, into the game, which you could buy as a player in the game. So that allows the owner of that car to identify with that thing from their real life as well. Or even if they haven't got one, they could still identify as that's the brand they want to be associated with. And I think what we're going to see is the next generation of user-generated content is a lot more of this, not just text and videos and photos, but people making digital assets that can be shared and repeated for other people to use. You have things like, as I mentioned, fashion in Animal Crossing. You'll have a lot more people making apparel and fashion for games. You can have cosmetics using augmented reality in Snapchat and Spark AR. Video effects for use in things like TikTok, and also with platforms like Roblox and Fortnite Create, and a new service called Core that launched recently. People building whole games and then sharing those games with other people as well. There's a bit of a gold rush on to be the YouTube of games, by which I mean not watching videos of games, but being a creator of games and letting other people experience those through the platform as well. So I'm often asked at the end of my talks, well, hopefully that's interesting, but so what? And the so what, it's a difficult one because pop culture is so big and vast. And what I've just talked to you about is a little drop. It's an interesting drop and it's changing very, very, very quickly. And I think it's a very influential part of pop culture. And if you haven't been keeping an eye on it recently, I think it's probably a lot weirder than you think it is. We as media people kind of like to tell stories we like to create ideas through storytelling or through story doing, and we can either do it top down through things like advertising and service design, or we can do it bottom up with things like digital engagement and brand experience. Top down storytelling like advertising, I'm not saying all of this is, nothing I've talked about here is going to replace fully anything else. It's all going to be there. It's all going to be additional to what we have. And even brands that are very, very, very digital first, like TikTok, still advertise on print and in TV because that's the message they need to get to a certain group of people in that way. But I think when you're approaching it from the other side, when you're coming bottom up, especially when you're looking at things in social and you're looking at user-generated content, it's going to get a lot harder to enter into that sector because there's so much creativity already happening down there, so many amazing tools available, that the barrier to entry is much higher than it used to be. You can't just make a thing, send it to Twitter or Facebook, and then off you go. The rest is history. To be involved in these things where pop culture is being created, you've got to work a lot harder for it. And I think it's a one-size-fits-all media approach is probably going to be a lot less effective than it was previously if you're trying to build a brand. So if I could tell you what to do, I'd be running my own consultancy agency somewhere and people would be paying me millions. I can't tell you what to do. What I can sort of suggest is that if you want to populate pop culture, you need to optimize for interests, not just general messages. You need to optimize for identity and realize that people express who they are and what they do online in different ways. You need to engage fandoms because that's where power lies, and you need to reward participation because they are getting rewarded for their participation through other means. You need to reward creators because they will put you in touch with that audience. you need to think globally, because that's the way everything is going right now. It's not the old Western model that imposes on everything else still. And you also be prepared, you have to be prepared to give up a little bit of control, because when you put something out into the world, if you're lucky, it will get remixed and iterated and shared and emulated, and versions of it will go everywhere. But you will have to kind of realize at that point that you no longer have control over the thing. It's terrifying and an amazing opportunity. Thank you very much for listening to me. Really appreciate your time, and look forward to more talks in the Curious season, which you should have sent to you by emails, and look for further announcements soon. And with that said, I'm done. Thank you very much.